Hi, it's Mandy Kirk. I'm a producer at Prologis, and I want to welcome you to Moving the World. In this episode, Will O'Donnell of Prologis Ventures sits down with Jim Adler, founder and general partner of Toyota Ventures, where they explore how corporate venture capital helps established companies stay ahead of disruption. Together, they discuss what it takes to bridge startup speed with enterprise scale, build partnerships that last, and turn emerging technologies into real-world impact. So, let's get moving.
All right. Well, welcome. I'm very excited today to host our new episode of Moving the World. Our special guest today is Jim Adler from Toyota Ventures. So really excited to have you on this program, Jim.
Thanks, Will. I'm really excited to be here.
Okay. So let's start. We'll introduce first Toyota Ventures, if you don't mind giving a brief overview of what Toyota Ventures is, and then we'll jump into a little bit of your background too.
Sure. So Toyota Ventures is Toyota's first institutional venture capital, early stage venture capital fund. We were founded in 2017 with the mission to discover what might be next for Toyota. So we always believed in my entrepreneurial background informed some of this thinking that startups are experiments in the marketplace and Toyota could learn a lot from the experiments that these startups are performing. So we wanted to look very much like an institutional VC. So we are structured that way. We do early stage investing in deep tech, in autonomy, mobility, robotics, next generation computing, advanced manufacturing, energy. We've got about 108 companies in the portfolio now. $800 million under management across 6 funds. As I said, early stage investing in startups all over the world.
Very cool. So this is exciting. And Prologis Ventures is actually celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. So it's also good to see someone who has been involved with corporate venture for an extended period of time. So for the benefit of our listeners, I'd love to dig a little bit into how you look at venture capital and specifically the role that corporate venture plays as opposed to kind of how traditional venture capital may work.
Having been a startup founder and executive for decades, I think other founders often think that CVC stands for chronically vague capital. And we were set up to dispel that. And I think it comes from a few mistakes that corporate venture capital makes. The first one is misalignment. You trust people that want the same things as you want. And what do startup founders want? It's pretty simple. They want their startup to be successful. The co-investors want the startup to be financially successful. And so it's important that the corporate venture capital firm wants the startup to be successful. So financial alignment matters a lot. And so we were structured, therefore, as institutional VC with respect to how we're financially incentivized and how we approach investing in startups. And our model is act like an institutional VC, just like anyone else on the cap table. Don't be slow. Don't be the corporate VC that always closes last or always asks for a second close. Close with everybody else. Don't handcuff startups with business units prematurely. There is a time and a place for that, but it ain't before the close. It's after the close. So our view is be as frictionless as you can. And if you can do that, then you have the benefits or you provide two benefits to the startup. One is, yes, the frictionless investment experience they get from the institutional VCs, but also the massive corporate scale that we can bring as corporate investors to the startup when and how they need it.
No, I think that's a really important distinction is that what I've thought about in the past is we really want Prologis portfolio companies to be able to leverage Prologis and not be encumbered by it. And as a company, we have very unique insight into how things work, where opportunities are, where pain points are. One of the questions I always get, I'm curious on your answer, but people always ask, are you a financial investor or a strategic investor? And when we first started, someone gave me the advice on there's nothing strategic about losing money. So I think you've kind of alluded to the same thing that you run as an institutional VC does. And great financial investments lead to better strategic value. You just can leverage your unique insights in the company Toyota behind you to drive unique value that no one else can, especially if you're thinking about it from a startup perspective of not encumbering startups with all sorts of clauses or.
That's right. I always say similarly to our internal colleagues who are saying, we just want strategic return. I said, bankruptcy is not strategic, and nobody wants to align with bankrupt companies. And strategic return actually naturally flows from strategic or financial strength. And so we want our startups to be financially strong. They make reliable, predictable business partners. And so this whole business about are you financial or strategic is really one-dimensional thinking. Really what you want is there's a continuum of, and we actually draw this out when we do investments on a plane where it's financial return or potential on the vertical and strategic potential on the horizontal. And we certainly want financially and strategic potential companies. Sometimes we do invest though companies that are not, we don't think are strategic, we think are more financially attractive. Turns out they move to the right as we invest, and some move to the left too. Like, I always, startups are like stem cells. You never know what they're going to become. And so you invest in the team, you invest in the opportunity, and then you see what happens. And the great thing about Toyota is that we are humble, and we know you cannot centrally plan innovation. So we really do respect the startup journey. I mean, me and many of our colleagues at Toyota Ventures have experienced that journey, and we really respect it deeply. And we're not going to, which I think corporate venture often gets wrong. They think that they know the right way because their company is big, but many of them were not necessarily there when the company was tiny. And so they understand scale, but they don't understand speed. And it's sort of, I have this whole model that I think about, and it's, of course, I'm obligated to engage in automotive metaphors. So I talk about fifth gear cultures and first gear cultures. Fifth gear cultures are companies that are under momentum, low torque, high speed. They're going down the road at 65 miles an hour, and they don't turn the wheel very much, because if you dogleg the wheel at 60 miles an hour, you flip the car, and a lot of bad things happen. But you're moving very fast. High sales, high profits, high market share. The other side is first gear, where it's very much low speed, high torque. There's a lot of pivoting. There's a lot of dust and getting kicked up. And there's a reluctance to walk away from any opportunity. But there's an affinity to make mistakes. Fifth gear culture is the exact opposite. There's this aversion to taking advantage of every opportunity, but you can't make mistakes because the mistakes cost too much. So like errors of commission are really bad in fifth gear, but errors of commission in first gear are fine. They don't cost you that much, maybe a few $1,000,000 at worst. But the errors of omission in an early stage, first gear, really bad. You can't miss your opportunities. But errors of omission in fifth gear are kind of okay because the company has more opportunities really that it can execute on.
Really, really like that analogy, because it is kind of at the core, especially as a corporate venture. How do I marry the incumbency, the scale, the excellence, the established business practices with a startup? And innovation happens when you remove constraints and suddenly white space opens up. I think one of the value propositions that corporate venture brings is unique insight and detailed understanding of certain business sectors. So you talked a little bit earlier on your areas of focus. It'd be great to dig into some of them and really talk about how you're marrying Toyota's history, expertise, and excellence against and leveraging that to make investments and then help startups with their journey.
Yeah. So as I said, we do a lot in AI, next-gen computing, robotics, energy, future manufacturing, materials. Toyota is 380,000 team members across the world. We have expertise across all of these areas. I am constantly learning of new business units that are doing amazing things that I never knew existed, or whole businesses, especially in Japan, businesses that we're engaged in that I never thought we were engaged in. So there are these amazing pools of expertise. Of course, the ones that have captured the imagination of the business community for decades has been Toyota Production System and our ability to manage our supply chain and manage our costs and manufacture automobiles at incredible scale. And I think, as you said, like we have incredibly deep knowledge and skill and mastery of many of these capabilities. We see a whole lot of data and experience that startups want to tap into. And so there is this often great marriage between teams that kind of just ambiently execute Toyota Production System, where, yeah, you can buy books about TPS and it's sort of in the popular business lore. But boy, when you sit and connect with a business unit where they just live and breathe it, it's reflexive to them, you really get a deep appreciation and the lessons that you can gain from that first person connection are really priceless. And what we do to marry, kind of based on the last discussion point we were making about how do you marry these things, there's certain teams in Toyota that have very low risk tolerance. When you have a vehicle coming off the assembly line every minute, if there's any problem at the final assembly of a 1 minute takt time line, heads roll. Nobody wants to be stopping that line. But there are other areas of the company, not just manufacturing, but other areas that have a much bigger risk appetite. And so the job of us at Toyota Ventures is to sort of marry the risk appetite of a business unit with the maturity level of a startup. Yes, they start in first gear, but they kind of shift up over time. And what made no sense a year or two ago for a business unit might make sense now that the company has matured somewhat. And it's sort of we have a portfolio support team, and we assign a member to every single company so they could kind of understand the trajectory. And that startups don't all gestate at the same rate, unfortunately, right? We all want them to go faster, but they don't. So we have to keep tabs on them so that you can then say, oh, wait, this company is mature enough now to connect to this business unit that previously had a much lower risk tolerance. And now the company has now cleared that risk tolerance and they can now connect. Same thing with the business units. Sometimes their risk appetite grows because, like, robotics is a great example. Physical AI is really going through a step change. And a lot of our teams, manufacturing especially, are realizing, wow, for the sake of meeting our volume commitments, we really want to connect to this technology. Where 5-10 years ago, they were like, we're going to wait and see. We don't see the capabilities yet can reach the exacting standards of Toyota. But now perhaps we can.
That's actually one of the things we've been most impressed with, I think, in the last 2 years, the evolution that happened with AI, specifically with physical AI, which was always one of the hardest challenges on how do you actually combine bytes with atoms in a way that's adoptable. And manufacturing has a very similar issue with logistics, that you have to, in an inflexible automation system, it's hard to deal with the deviations that come with seasonality or changing a manufacturing line, or with logistics. How do you move inventory around? Or there's obviously a lot of seasonality, but with physical AI, the adaptability and ability for the machines to actually learn to adapt. And I like your analogy because you both have the business unit, it's becoming more comfortable with risk, but the technology is also now meeting. And the last year or two, the amount of automation, and we actually just coded a investment in a company called Walden together, which we're very excited about.
Yeah, that's right.
But
it's great to join on a cap table.
But that's an example of 3-4 years ago that would have been very far fetched, and now we're seeing the intersection where a humanoid, and there's obviously a lot of publicity, but that is now becoming a reality that can be integrated into even very risk averse and structured environments.
Yeah, we are super excited about Walden, but the entire sector. You can see in the growth rate. I think it's like north of 45% CAGR growth in physical AI now, because you don't need a whole team of system integrators that land in your shop and never leave, because these robots are not being trained with software, they're being trained by example. And that is a huge unlock where you can have your own teams that understand the workload and the use cases better than really any system integrator. They can teach the robots. And there is so much at Toyota. We have this idea or this principle of Monozukuri, which is expertise. There are so many team members that have this deep, decades long building of their craft. And if we can institutionally capture that knowledge or capture that institutional knowledge, then I think these robots will really deliver value. We always believe at Toyota that it's automation with a human touch. In Japanese, the word is jidoku. And I mean, for 100 years, Toyota's celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. And the company was founded with this idea. Takichi Toyota, who the company founded as a loom company, the Toyota Automatic Loom Company. And the initial mission was, why can't a machine help my mother with the struggle of her manual loom, her manual cloth making machine? How can I amplify my mother's work? And Toyota has been for 100 years amplifying people with machinery. And I think we're seeing the next phase of that. And what I love about robotics today is they're being taught by humans. And I think I think they're worried about the wrong things. I think at Toyota, we are more governed by the availability of labor to meet our volume requirements. And so we see this great partnership between people and this physical AI technology. And therefore, our workforce will be amplified by this tech.
It's fascinating history because when I was preparing for this conversation, one of the things that just amazed me is the evolution of Toyota. When you look at it holistically, there's so many disparate industries and solutions that you guys are building in areas that you touch. But that concept of how do you amplify humans with machines, it actually creates a very thoughtful through line of how the company evolved. And if that's kind of the premise, then, okay, looms aren't as popular as they may have been 100 years ago. But you can kind of see as the company evolved, because we weren't a loom company. Our thesis was we're going to amplify humans with machinery. We can evolve into other areas. And it actually is an amazing thought because it really then removed the restrictions or constraints that we had to be a loom company, that no, this is our secret sauce. So on that, I was actually reading a deal that you guys did recently with Apex, where you had Toyota Racing Development actually was partnering with them to manufacture satellite components. And that's, again, kind of disparate, but it's a similar process. So I'd love to hear a little bit more on how you guys thought about that and the evolution there.
Yeah. It ties a bunch of these threads together. The mission statement Toyota Ventures is to discover what's next for Toyota. So we're exploring these ideas. And in 2018, our now chairman, CEO at the time, Akio Toyoda, gave the company the mission to transform into a mobility company beyond cars. And a lot of if you look at our portfolio, you say, well, there's not a lot of car tech there. There's a lot of the other areas we discussed, robotics certainly helping on the manufacture of cars, but air mobility and space mobility and energy doesn't necessarily fit with cars. And we feel that what we just discussed, the amplification of humans with technology, is really the through line for 100 years of Toyota. And we think whether you're moving people, moving the car, moving products, moving the heart, which is really what if you get into a Toyota, you hit the accelerator, you feel amplified, you feel connected. And so we have been investing in space since 2019 because we felt, as we did with air mobility in Joby, which is our electrical vertical takeoff and landing vehicle investment we did in 2017, that's doing amazingly well, and Toyota's really leaned into that. We think, at least at Toyota Ventures so far, that space mobility could be the next modality for how we expand. And so we made this investment in Apex Space, and Ian Cinnamon, the CEO, said, the aerospace industry is really struggling because all their satellites are built bespoke. And I have a long history. Early in my career, I was a rocket engineer for what's now Lockheed Martin. So I certainly knew and was involved in that. Yeah, not a scientist, an engineer. I will not aspire to be a scientist, but we did the hard work of being on the floor a lot of the time. But what we realized when I joined Toyota is it's not just what space can bring to the automotive industry like Toyota, but what can automotive really bring to the space industry? And so when you think about what the estimates say, 100,000 satellites will need to be built in the next 5 to 10 years. And the industry can only build about 5 to 7,000 a year. So you realize there's like a deficit of about 50,000 vehicles, satellites to be built. And Toyota makes 50,000 vehicles in about one shift. So, the automotive expertise and focus on safety and quality and reliability and durability really is the unlock to building these kind of vehicles at scale. And Ian Cinnamon came to us and said, we're building satellites with TPS, Toyota Production System. I'm like, yeah, tell me more. And turns out he really is. And so after we made the investment in 2023, we soon introduced them to the Toyota Racing Development Team. And these folks, race cars, every weekend for Toyota. But it turns out they use TPS to run this incredibly vertically integrated shop. So they cast their own engines, they do their own chassis, they have to do everything themselves in order to eke out the minutia of performance to win races. So it turns out that orbits and racetracks are very inhospitable environments. And I always kind of envision that should be the case, but you never know until you introduce the companies. The Toyota Racing Development Team, Apex Space said, yeah, you guys should get to know each other because these guys do small volume, super high precision on the Toyota side. They do everything themselves. You guys should talk to them. And sure enough, they did. And they had very tight tolerances. They couldn't find a vendor to make some of their parts for their satellites. The Toyota Racing Development Team is very much a first gear, going back to our first gear, fifth gear group within Toyota. So yes, the 1 minute takt time group, they're a fifth gear group. They move very fast and with a very low risk tolerance. But the Racing Development Team, they run at very low volume, but they run very fast. And it was like a match made in heaven. They figured out what the specs needed to be. The TRD team jumped at it. They're now building these housings for the satellites. We're going to have a Toyota logo in space next year. And it's building momentum, which is wonderful to see.
It's interesting because one of the biggest challenges that I think all corporate venture or innovation faces is the change management within an organization. And what's interesting, the way that you just framed that, helped me understand a little bit on how you guys deal with the change management, that you took seemingly two very different industries and figured out the commonalities. And we had done some work with IDEO a number of years ago, and they gave me an example where surgery at hospitals were actually looking at pit crews at racetracks in order to learn how very similar, like in hospital, fast moving, high pressure environment where seconds matter. And you took very different environments and you could get learning. So going back to Toyota, it seems like culturally there is this curiosity and how do we learn, but by creating through lines on enhancing humans with machines, it alleviates some of the change management because it's a natural progression, it sounds like. So I'd love to hear a little bit more on how you guys actually manage that, because that's the biggest challenge, both startup space, but then also the incumbents, and how do we adapt to where the world's going, not what I've done for the last 15 years.
That's right. I think that's we have the star we're steering by, which is Akio Toyota's objective: transform to a mobility company beyond cars. So that's our North Star, which is great because it does orient the team. So when you walk into a business unit, my first slide is usually that slide to say, like, our chairman has sort of greenlit this direction. So don't throw me out of your office in the first 5 minutes. But then the question is, okay, when and how and why, not why, but why, what and how. And then you get into this, what Peter Drucker said, years and years ago is, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And and the culture is so invisible to the teams. So the first gear teams at Toyota don't even know they're first gear teams because they're usually plugged into fifth gear teams, or they report up to fifth gear teams, and there's always some friction there, and they don't know why. They just know it doesn't feel good, and there's a lot of consternation. I'm like, and the fact that we've been able to name and frame it and say, like, yeah, because you guys are culturally disparate, and there's this great, I think, David Foster Wells picture of two fish in a fishbowl, and one says, "Hey, how's the water?" and the other fish says, "What's water?" And so, like, we're surrounded by culture, but we don't really, we can't understand it, we don't feel it, but yet all our behavior is governed by it. And it really comes down to, the way I think about culture is what you reward, what you punish, and what you tolerate. And first gear teams punish, reward, and tolerate different things than fifth gear teams said, like we talked about earlier, errors of commission versus errors of omission, at different emphasis with certain cultures. And so our approach has been, depending on the opportunity that the startup provides and could provide to the company, where's the best place to plug it in and use a cultural lens rather than a capabilities lens? Because sometimes the capabilities lens ignores the cultural reluctance, or let me say cultural impedance mismatch. And then they just reject it for reasons that, and I scratched my head for years. I'm like, these guys should be finishing each other's sentences. They're both manufacturing, or one, and they both are trying to do the same thing. Why aren't they? And I realize is that they value the different things. And that is a cultural thing. They value, their risk tolerance is different. Yeah, big company, small company. I think that's first order thinking. I think second order thinking says, is there anyone in the company that can be almost the host cell to bring this through, because they find a connection point with that startup. And in Apex and TRD, it was that magic that happened.
What I really love about that too is that anytime you're doing something different, there's going to be friction, and you just have to acknowledge it. And internally, the way I've talked about, I mean, what we're trying to do is really, really hard. And if it was easy, then, well, anyone could do it. We probably shouldn't. But if we're going to try something really hard, there's going to be friction. And I think by naming the friction, actually identifying, it's actually then easier to solve, because, okay, well, this is naturally going to occur because I have a first gear company and a fifth gear company trying to work. And let's embrace the fact there's friction. And it can actually disarm some of the barriers, because as you say, culture is just there. And a lot of times I don't know what my behaviors are driving me to behave, but it's because I'm sitting in a first gear company operating with fifth gear people, and it will drive you crazy. Right. But if I've named both, then you'll actually give a process in how you work together.
And it's not, it's one last thing. Well, it's not either are wrong. And I think that's what, it's like, hey, startup good, company bad, or company good, good, startup bad. It's such, no, it's just different tools for different jobs. And then no one is feeling defensive or inadequate. It's just, a startup values speed and is trying to figure out where the innovation is going. And the business unit is sort of responsible for making sure the business continues to perform. Yeah. And both are very important to the long-term success of both organizations.
It's interesting too, because I think within a multinational company, you're going to have an overlay of cultures to different countries. But then also clearly, you created a universal culture of intellectual curiosity, change, continuous improvement, this supersedes. So it will be interesting. I'm sure you guys have thought a lot of times on how you marry what's best about Japan, what's best about Germany, and best about the US into an integrated system where we don't lose the uniqueness of a Japanese culture. But I consistently hearing this through line of, back to your thesis on machines enhancing humans, or like, let's really increase productivity, et cetera. So how do you guys think about the marriage between individuals, I guess, backgrounds where they grew up, versus the culture that you're setting as a company?
Well, I think the sort of the cultural, we've talked a lot about corporate culture. There's also the cultural background. And I think the art of this is, there's certain human values that are universal. Respect, responsibility, reciprocity, dignity, these sorts of things, humor. I Speaking plainly but respectfully, these things do cut across. And when I got to Toyota, and I had been a long time Toyota owner. My first car was a Toyota Corona. I bought it at 16 with my own money. I was bussing tables, and I needed to get away from my nutty family. And and the Corona gave me freedom. So I love Toyota for the rest of my life because that car was freedom. And then I've had at least a dozen Toyotas over the years. And then I got behind the curtain at Toyota and understood why I love Toyota so much my whole life. That love of the product, the exacting detail, the respect for the customer, and just like, hey, our customers are gonna have to put their most precious possessions in the world, the ones they love, into our products. And that is such a deep value of the company. You can't help but just be moved by that. And you see it all over the company. But then, the Japanese love to, go out face to face, have a good dinner together, laugh easily. And that really cuts through a lot of the friction that you'll have. You might have a tough day crossing swords and duking it out. Then you go out and you have sushi and a beer, and it just sort of melts all away. You have a few laughs, and you realize that, you might disagree on a few things, but you love our customers, you love our team members, you love our partners and dealers, and that's why we're here. And you could work through a lot of this stuff.
So how do you think then, I love the culture that we've been talking about from a founder perspective, when you're coming in and suddenly working with a Toyota or a Prologis, how do you think in translating because they're clearly first gear companies, but they have to be able to translate and have empathy for us larger companies that are probably in the third through fifth gear, depending who they're talking to at the company.
Yeah. I think expectation management on all sides matters a lot, and don't hesitate to give the reality of that. But that should not. We treat our startups like they are our customers. We're very clear about who the stakeholders are. The customer is the startup. The limited partner, the capital source, is Toyota, and the team is our third stakeholder that kind of marries the two. Yeah. And so we always want to serve our customer well, which means they always have a person to call and communicate with, and honestly and openly, again, plain speaking, clear thinking, connection with our customer, and try to figure out what business unit could resonate. And we do the same orientation with the business units. And then we just, if things are, and typically a large automotive OEM is going to move slower than the startup would like.
Yeah.
Almost always. TRD APEX is one of the rare things. Yeah. Because there's 380,000 team members. I would argue 99 and two thirds percent of them are fifth gear. Okay. They're fifth gear. They just are. We're a $300 billion sales company making 10 million vehicles a year. It's fifth gear. Sorry. But sharing that orientation with the startup through our portfolio support team, and they get one throat to choke. They get one manager that connects to each company. So the CEO, founding team has one person to call at Toyota. So they don't have to look at this 380,000 behemoth. They get one connection, and that is their conduit to connect to the company, which has been incredibly helpful. Nothing's worse than wasting a startup's time and sending them on a goose chase through this labyrinth that is Toyota, that's been built over 100 years. So that helps a lot. And then we have to also choose the business units appropriately so that they have a chance of meeting expectations. Sometimes we'll tell the startup, look, this business unit is the one that could resonate. They're Their risk tolerance is low, but we're happy to make the introduction and give it a shot. And so expectation management key.
Our head of platform just had our 5th-year anniversary yesterday, and I think it was one of the better decisions we made as ventures to bring in a platform team for that exact reason. And that time is valuable for all of us. Toyota or Prologis will exist if things are a tad bit slower for a couple months. Startups won't. So being able to have people who actually work with the startups, I mean, for corporate venture groups out there, I mean, it is an absolute critical part. And it's one thing I wish I had actually started earlier in the group, because the team it really allows the connection between the company and startups. In our case, a lot of our investments are actually related to our customers. So our platform team has become actually one of our better business development teams within the organization, because who doesn't want to go talk about robots? So when they call up the software of our customers, like, their customers love to get on the phone and learn what we're learning. So it's been cool.
Because you're tapped into the disruptive innovation that's happening. So and your customers want that. Your business units, some business units want that too. We get that all the time. Like, what's going on in robotics? I mean, this happened years ago, and I mean, we had the research teams doing a lot of robotic stuff, but this physical AI thing kind of came up relatively quickly, and we were one of the first calls of like, and even we have been investing in robotics since 2017, but there's been this sea change, and I think another sea change may be coming, being that telescope into the future for our business units and for our customers, or for, as you said, for your customers, is really a critical value of the venture team.
Yeah, it's exciting. Well, I think we're getting close to our time here.
So
it's been great. I did want to thank you very, very much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's been a incredible journey that you guys have been on, not just Toyota for being around for 100 years and the evolution, but also the venture group that you're running and the impact that you're having across the organization, and frankly, across some industries that are impacting us all. So I appreciate you taking the time and spending it.
Thanks, Will, it was a great discussion, and really appreciate the invitation. Thank you so much.
So that's a wrap on this episode of Moving the World. A huge thank you to Will and Jim for the conversation. For more discussions with the innovators shaping the future of the modern economy, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, keep on moving.